Hello and welcome to How to School of Life. I'm your host, Sean Liu. Today, my guest is a pioneering researcher who more than 20 years ago became the very first person to put a name and a measurement to something that we all do but rarely talk about, and that is self-compassion. Her name is Dr. Kristin Neff. Dr. Neff holds a PhD from UC Berkeley on moral development, and she is currently a professor of human development at the University of Texas at Austin. Since her landmark papers on self-compassion were published in 2003, more than 5,000 academic studies on self-compassion have followed. In a field of study she essentially opened up in the West. Her decades of research suggests that self-criticism isn't the driving force of success that we've been so often taught. More often, it's the very thing quietly burning us out. In contrast, self-compassion is the key to real change. Her first book, Self-Compassion, has been translated around the world, and here in Taiwan, it has just been released as 自我慈悲终结内耗重建心理韧性与内在稳定的温柔力量. Now, I've personally followed Dr. Neff's work for a long time, and the long-awaited publication of her genre-defining book in Taiwan, which is actually talked about in certain studies in her book, makes me very excited to have the opportunity to chat with her. So joining us here today online, please welcome Dr. Kristin Neff. Hello. Hey, Kristin. How are you?
Hi, Sean. Nice to see you. It's great to talk with you
today. Good
to
see you.
Yeah.
So I want to start off by asking, most of us have been told our whole lives that, being hard on ourselves is what makes us better. Better students, better professionals, better people. But your book basically says that's wrong. So what's the most surprising thing the science actually shows?
Yeah. So first of all, there's a big difference between having high standards for yourself and wanting to reach certain goals and what you do when you don't meet your standards. Like, do you encourage yourself? Do you help yourself? Do you support yourself to go ahead and try to get to that higher level? Or do you beat yourself up? Do you feel shame? Do you put yourself down? And that's a huge difference. And so what the research shows is that self-compassion, and we can get into what I mean by that, but in other words, constructive criticism, seeing yourself clearly, seeing how you might want to change and improve is very helpful. But taking it personally, shaming yourself, criticizing yourself, being harsh with yourself actually just creates performance anxiety. It makes it more difficult to learn from your mistakes, and it makes it harder to reach your goals. And so it's a little counterintuitive because we take things so personally. We see our goals and ourselves as the same thing, and they aren't. We can love ourselves unconditionally even when we fail, but it doesn't mean that we're okay with failure. Of course we don't want to fail. We want to do better. We want to reach our best. But it's just like, the best coaches, they give it straight to their athletes. They say, this didn't work. This is what you need to improve. Here's how to do it. But they do it in a way that actually supports their athletes to reach their goals, as opposed to saying, you're horrible, just give up now, which doesn't really help anybody. And that's what self-criticism is. When we take it personally and we shame ourselves, it's not that shame has no value at all. Shame gives us important information like, oh, maybe something's not working here. But if we take it personally, then it actually makes it harder to learn and to achieve what we want to achieve.
Can you share with us, what are the experimental evidence that actually shows that, being kinder to yourself or being more supportive actually leads to better outcomes and performance?
Well, so I'll talk about two studies if you're interested in research. One of the first was done, it came out of UC Berkeley. They had 3 groups of students, and they gave them all really hard items from the vocabulary portion of the SAT that everyone failed. It was just, the hardest items. And so they gave different instructions to each of the groups. One of the groups, they gave a self-compassion instruction, which is basically like they said, okay, you failed it. That's okay. You can acknowledge that, which is kind of the mindfulness part of self-compassion. It happens to a lot of people. Don't take it personally, which is the common humanity part of self-compassion. And see if you can be kind and supportive to yourself about the fact that you just failed this exam. So that's group one. They got the self-compassion instructions. Another group, they gave self-esteem instructions. So self-compassion is about kind of acknowledging our imperfection and trying to help ourselves. Self-esteem is, I am great, I'm perfect. It's kind of like, positive self-worth. So the self-esteem group, they say, don't worry about it. You must be smart. You got into UC Berkeley. And then the third group, they didn't say anything because what they were probably doing was beating themselves up. You can't do that ethically as a researcher. They didn't say anything. And of course, these were UC Berkeley students. So they were probably saying, oh, I can't believe I failed. They were being hard on themselves. They were criticizing themselves. So that was the phase 1 of the experiment. And then phase 2 of the experiment was, okay, we're going to take another version. We're going to take more vocabulary items for the SAT test. You can study as long and hard as you want for the next test. Let us know when you're done. And then we'll administer the second test. And what they found was that the people who were told to be self-compassionate about the failure the first time studied the longest and the hardest. And then how long you studied for the test actually predicted how well you did on the exam. Right? Wow. So what this says is that, acknowledging, hey, failure happens. Failure is how we learn. And when we actually accept that, we don't take it personally, then it allows us to keep trying to learn and do better in the long run. So that's one study. And then I'll just give another one, going back to the athletes. We actually did a study with top-level athletes at colleges around the United States. And if you're an athlete, you can't be second best. You have to be the top to get your scholarship, or if you want to go into, the pros. And what we did is we trained teams, including the coaches, this idea of self-compassion, that again, it's not letting your standards slide, but it's saying, try to meet your standards in a caring, supportive way, like you're on the same team instead of being harsh and belittling yourself. And what we found is those athletes who were trained to be more self-compassionate, their athletic performance actually improved. And that's because when we fail and we take it personally and we aren't kind to or supportive to ourselves and we shame ourselves, it creates performance anxiety, which actually gets in the way of our ability to do our best. I mean, if you saw the Olympics recently, right, some people who were expected to do so well, they didn't achieve because they took it really personally. So self-compassion, ironically, even though the word self is in there, it's not taking it so personally. It's saying, human beings are imperfect, right? We need to learn from our mistakes. We need to do it in a helpful, supportive way. And that actually, it helps the most learn and grow and achieve our best potential.
This very supportive, the supportive way of responding, I think there's there's a lot of difference there, right? Because I think a lot of people, they really want to understand what is truly self-compassionate talk versus what is self-esteem. Right. As in like, okay, this is good. You got this. I know you got this. I don't know, like something like a sentence like that, would that be considered more self-compassionate or self-esteem?
Well, so there's a subtle difference. So if it's like, you got this, that might be supportive, but why do you got this? So self-compassion would say, you have this because if you fail, I will still be here for you. Self-esteem is, you got this because you're going to succeed, but if you don't succeed, I won't be here for you. Self-esteem is, I am worthy because I do well. I am worthy because I do well. It's conditional. I'm special and above average. That's why I'm worthy. Self-compassion is, I'm worthy because I'm a flawed human being. It doesn't, whether I succeed or fail, I'm still worthy, but I care, and therefore I'm going to try to help myself. Self-indulgence is like pulling the wool over your eyes, or just saying, it doesn't matter, it's fun, you don't even have to try hard. And that's actually not compassionate, because if you're self-indulgent, that means you're giving yourself pleasure. It feels good, even if it's harming you in the long run, and that's not compassionate. So compassion in psychology is defined as concern with the alleviation of suffering. And so when you're concerned with alleviating your own suffering, saying everything's fine when it isn't helpful. It may feel good, but it's going to harm you in the long run. So that's not compassionate. Saying, you got this, you're better than everyone else, that can be a problem, because actually maybe you do need to learn and grow. Maybe some of your behaviors are problematic. Maybe you don't have this. Maybe you still need to study hard or try hard. So that may not be helpful. Saying I've got you, that's helpful. Instead of you have got this, like you are good. Yeah. You're good enough. Well, maybe you are good enough, but maybe your performance isn't. It's kind of distinguishing that word, taking the worth out of the picture. Self-compassion is, all human beings are intrinsically worthy. The moment a baby is born, they don't have to like go to graduate school to be worthy. Human beings are intrinsically worthy. You know, just like parents naturally, hopefully, want to be there for their children. They not all are, but you know, hopefully, you know, whether or not they fail or succeed, we still love our children. But of course, we want them to succeed. Because we love them. That's why we want them to succeed.
Well, Kristin, what you're describing seems to be almost like the platonic ideal of, you know, what parenting or, you know, unconditional love. But what really actually happens in practice is often not that, right?
That is true. And that can be a problem for children. When you feel like your parents only love you when you succeed, that can cause a lot of psychological problems. That can cause perfectionism, this idea that my worth is contingent. Because people use our self-worth as like the reward. Like, if you succeed, then you'll feel good about yourself. The problem with that is that your subconscious is registering, but if I don't succeed, then everyone will hate me and I'll hate myself. And that creates anxiety. And anxiety, you know, being a little bit anxious about like wanting to succeed, that's okay. But when it becomes extreme, it actually interferes with our ability to do our best. Performance anxiety works against us. And also the real important difference is what happens when you fail. You know, we know failure is our best teacher, but we don't want to believe it. You know, so when we fail, we take it personally and say, I should not have failed. And we shame ourselves and we shut down our ability to learn and grow. You know, whereas compassion says, yes, everyone fails. It doesn't mean that you are a failure. Yet, there's a yet with self-compassion. Because I care about you, I want you to succeed. What do you need? This is what self-compassion asks. What do you need? You know, how might you do things differently? Don't take it personally, but, you know, if I care about you, how can I help you? So think about athletic coaches. Some coaches may be tough, and self-compassion can be tough. It can say, that behavior is not acceptable, or that outcome is not good enough. You're good enough, but the outcome isn't good enough. A good coach may be tough, but players know that the coach loves them and believes in them, and that's why they're being tough with them, versus a coach who's just belittling them and shaming them. You know, and you can tell the difference internally in our own mind.
Right. It's very subtle difference, I think, especially to a culture that is quite steeped in the self-discipline aspect of things. And where I was born and where I spent quite a number of years in Taiwan, there's a common saying, like, don't praise your little children, because as soon as you praise them, they grow a tail and then they become little wild animals.
Well,
and at the same time,
similar saying in English, spare the rod, spoil the child. Like, you need to be harsh, otherwise children will be spoiled. So in American culture, we have that saying as well. So
but in East Asian culture, which really, you know, which really puts a lot of emphasis on education. Right. And we see this even with my kids. You know, we came here about 2.5 years ago to New York, and they previously they were all in school in Taiwan, and then now they're in school here in the US. Actually, you see quite a difference in the way that the teachers interact with the students. But I can't really quite put a finger on it, right? Until, of course, then I read your book. And then realize that, oh, okay, there is a subtle shift, that the mindset is different, but then it creates a difference in every single interaction. So if you can walk us through, right, because self-compassion, I believe is what my goal is to actually really try to explain self-compassion to our listeners in Taiwan, because it's so easily misunderstood. Right, it's so easily understood as being self-indulgent. And in your book, you talk about the 3 core elements of self-compassion. Can you tell us about that?
And before I do that, I'm just going to reemphasize, if you look at the Latin roots of the word compassion, it's like, how are you with suffering? And it's all about the alleviation of suffering. And just to say, it's not like Asian parents are bad who are driving their kids hard, because their underlying wish is for their children not to suffer. right? So we have to keep that in mind. It's not like some people are mean or people who are self-critical are mean, because it's driven by this wish to alleviate suffering. So deep down,
yes.
it is a compassionate wish. The problem is it's not as effective, right? And this is because when self-worth gets conflated with our outcomes or behavior, that's what makes it less effective, right? So self-indulgence is not self-compassionate because it causes suffering. Harsh self-criticism, you are bad unless you achieve these goals, is not actually effective because it causes suffering. Constructive criticism, which is, I love you regardless, but I believe in you. I believe you can change. Here's what went wrong, and here's what would be better if you did this instead, but it's coming from love, not from shame. That is actually the most effective at alleviating suffering. It gets the best outcomes. Okay, so just to kind of clear those up. And so there are three elements to self-compassion, which are really important. The first of which is actually directly addresses this difference between self-indulgence and self-compassion, and that is mindfulness. Mindfulness is clear seeing. And if you have any awareness, like, Buddhist practice, a lot of it is cultivating mindfulness, which is clear seeing, which is recognizing what's happening. If we're fooling ourselves, if we're saying it's fine when it isn't, if we're saying our test scores are okay, even though we know it's going to mean, we aren't going to be able to reach our goals, that's not being mindful. So we need to clearly see what is happening. We don't ignore it. We don't pretend it's not there. But on the other hand, we don't exaggerate it. Maybe your test scores were not what you wanted them to be. It's not like the end of the world. They can be improved. It doesn't mean that you are a bad person. We're not like running away with the storyline of it. We're just seeing them clearly. Like, these were my test scores. This is what it means. This is what it doesn't mean. That's mindfulness, clear seeing. It's a huge part of self-compassion. So that's one element. And then the next element is kindness. And again, kindness doesn't just mean making you feel good. It's warmth and supportiveness. And so sometimes when I talk about fierce self-compassion, I don't know if you have a similar phrase in Taiwan, mama bear. Do you have this idea of mama bear? I don't know if it translates.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. But is it when you know that mama bear is acting out of protection, like out of love, it lands differently. Like when you know that your parent is protecting you because they love you. That's where it's coming from, not because
it's
you're
very
worthless.
different from, there's a similar thing, which is called tiger mom, right? But tiger mom is more, I think, the tigerness is directed more towards the children instead of to the outside world. As opposed to a mama bear, which is protecting
I've heard
the
about
cubs from the
tiger mom. I don't understand it very well, but I imagine some tiger moms, the children know it's because my mother loves me. That's why she's being so strict. Other children may get the message just because I'm not worthy, and that's why she's acting this way. So all of it is, my first paper on self-compassion, I'm sorry, I'm backtracking here before I get to the third element, but my first paper was Self-Compassion, a Healthier Alternative to Self-Esteem. So the whole thing is predicated on the difference between self-compassion and self-esteem. So self-worth is a huge part of it. Does your worth come from self-esteem, which is a judgment of worth? In other words, I am only worthy if I'm above average, which of course in Asian cultures, it's not the same thing, but in American culture, that's huge. We all have to be special and above average. But in Asian cultures, achievement, your self-esteem is really predicated on achievement. How high do I achieve? How hard do I work? The performance. But it's still conditional. I'm only worthy. Self-esteem only comes if I achieve my goals. Self-compassion says your worth is unconditional. Your worth comes simply because you are a flawed human being, like all human beings, trying not to suffer. Okay? So it's like assumed. It's not conditional. You take the self-worth out of the picture. But if you don't want to suffer, what do you care about? If in your culture it's important to achieve on these tests, then you'll try to achieve. Some cultures, maybe that's not important. Maybe your values are different. Maybe your values, so what people strive for may be different, but you don't want to suffer. That's like at the core of it is desire for the alleviation of suffering versus the desire to feel I'm worthy. And that's huge. Okay, so going back to the kindness element. you're kind and you're warm and you're supportive and you ask the question, how can I help? Like, what do you need? What would be most helpful in this situation? It's like the desire to alleviate suffering shines through that kindness. It's not kindness that says, don't worry, sweetness. It's okay that you just failed your exams or you aren't getting out of bed or anything self-indulgent. That's actually not kind. It may be warm, but it's not actually kind. It's because it causes suffering. This is so huge to understand this difference.
So this kindness, is it how we parent or how we talk to our kids or how we talk to ourselves?
Well, I'm talking about how we talk to ourselves. So you might think of self-compassion as a way of reparenting ourselves because our parents might not have understood this.
Interesting.
And again, it doesn't mean they were bad. They were trying to do their best, but it actually maybe wasn't so effective, you know? And I'll get to this. It's not just our parents. It's also our biology. It's also the way our physiology works. So some of these are just the way the nervous system works. So I want to come back to that. I don't want to just blame culture or just blame our parents because it's also our biology. But getting back to the three components. So there's mindfulness, seeing clearly what is. There's kindness, which means how can I alleviate suffering? How can I be supportive? How can I be helpful? What's going to actually help in this situation? And then the third element, which is key, is a sense of connectedness to the larger whole, right? And in some cultures, this is where you might say Asian cultures have a leg up on Western cultures because it's more of a collectivistic culture. There's more understanding culturally that of course we're part of the larger whole. The idea that the individual separately from everyone else doesn't really make sense. But in Western cultures like the United States with individualism, it's like, we tend to take it personally. Now, having said this, because I've known a lot of people from Asian cultures, even though there's this belief that I'm part of a larger whole, I'm connected to the larger whole, I learned about self-compassion from Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Vietnamese Zen master who talked about interbeing, who comes directly from interdependence. If you think about what shame is, so shame, in some ways, it supports collectivism because the other people may disapprove of me, and that's why I feel the shame. But a moment of shame is incredibly self-focused. Think about it. When you're feeling shame, you feel like there's something wrong with me, I'm abnormal, I'm unworthy. When you're feeling shame, your head is like locked in this little tiny viewpoint.
When you feel like there's a spotlight on you.
Yeah, it's incredibly self-focused. You can't see the larger picture of what happened. What might have been the circumstances that led to this? How is what happened connected to the larger whole? So, again, shame is evolutionarily adaptive, right? We develop shame because, again, if we anger the group members and they kick us out, then we can't survive. So it does have a function, but it actually, ironically, makes us very self-focused. And when you're so self-focused, we can't learn. Because to learn, we need to pull our head up out of the sand and say, oh, I see, there was this circumstance, and this is, maybe I should have done this approach. To learn, we need to be able to see the bigger picture. And when we feel shame, we can't see the bigger picture because we're so narrowly focused. And this is why shame is actually not helpful for learning. There's lots of research that shows that shame makes it almost impossible to learn. So it's counterproductive. It's understandable, but it's counterproductive. And you've heard, as well, that Asian cultures tend to be more shame-based. And it's good for group cohesion, but it actually works against the ability to learn. So, all these things are double-edged swords. So anyway, common humanity. So the third element is common humanity, seeing the bigger picture. It's kind of, I like to talk about the fact that even though the word is self-compassion, when we feel the self is when we feel like a failure, we feel inadequate, or we're so focused on our suffering, we're lost in ourselves. A moment of self-compassion is a moment of moving away from this sense of separate self, or inadequate self, or shameful self, toward the field of compassionate presence. Compassionate presence includes everyone. It includes others. It includes me. It sees the bigger picture. There's lots of research that shows we're less self-focused when we're including ourselves in the circle of compassion. And it's a little misleading because the word self is there and people assume it's like
Right.
self-esteem and it's self-focused. It's
Right.
not. It's actually self-focused when we don't include ourselves in the circle of compassion and we think we're different and we think we're shameful and we think we're intrinsically flawed or wrong or abnormal or bad. That's where it's self-focused. With self-compassion, it's just like, oh, this compassion flows inward and it flows outward. It flows everywhere because we're all connected. We're all part of a larger whole. That's really what's going on.
So let me try to take these three elements and put it into, say, a sentence that I would talk to myself, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
like a self-compassionate sentence
Yeah.
would be, if something goes wrong,
Yeah.
I would say, okay, this thing went wrong and let's look at this issue. It's gone wrong. And this hurts. Yeah, this really sucks. I didn't want this to happen, but this happened. And you know what? It's what do I need to do right now to make things better? And I know that it happens to everybody, right?
Yeah.
Everyone makes mistakes. So this is part of the process. But let's look at the issue and let's find out what I can do to make it better.
Yes.
So this would be the constructive, self-compassionate self-talk.
Yes. And so the thing about what can I do to make it better, it's a tricky one
Yeah.
because there are some things that we can change and some things we can't change. And so this is
Okay.
where wisdom comes into it, right? So things you can change, let's say maybe you failed your exam or you had a setback in your sports. You might be able to practice more or learn more or understand it more. And I can get better with that. But we also have to accept the fact that right now, I have to accept the fact that it's hurting. Because ironically, if I use this desire to make it better, to get rid of the pain in the present moment, then what we're really doing is we're suppressing the pain. We're pushing it into our subconscious. And what we know is that it actually makes things worse when we do that. So we need the space of mindfulness to see clearly, okay, this hurts. It sucks. I need to be able to be with that. It hurts. If I failed, ouch, it hurts. Okay, can I open to that reality? Everyone fails. It's part of life. Doesn't mean I'm abnormal. This is how we learn. And what can I do to make it better? Part of that is accepting the fact that this hurts. It's because it makes it worse. We don't accept that.
Right.
And then part of it is what in the future might I do that might help? Knowing that, I'm sorry, if I were to try to be a professional skier, I could practice my whole life. I'm never going to get there, right? So it's also, we need wisdom. What are things we can do and what are things we can't do? It's like, I'm sure you've got some version of the serenity prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Right, to be able to tell the difference, yes.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some version of that in every culture because it's just wisdom, right?
Yeah. So if we were to take the opposite of that, right? Okay. So the opposite of all those three things, not mindful, not self-kind.
Identified, it's me, I'm taking it personally, I'm like, no,
right, and no common humanity. Then just something goes wrong, the self-talk would be, oh my God, this went wrong. Oh, crap. What am I going to do? You know what? I'm going to get kicked off the team now. This is terrible. Everyone's going to think terribly of me. Oh man,
and it's your fault. I can't believe. We judge ourselves. Yeah. And by the way, why do we judge ourselves? Because a part of us thinks that if we judge ourselves, then that means that we have total control. And that maybe we could have avoided failure if we had just worked harder. It's like the inability to accept that failure is how we learn is part of the problem. And we think if I judge myself, I'm bad. I should have gotten that right. It's my fault. I'm bad. And I get it. I have to say there's a kind of slight difference between Asian cultures or more collectivistic cultures and more Western cultures in self-criticism. The problem with self-criticism in more individualistic cultures is that we have what's called, It's called Carol Dweck's view about it, an entity view.
Fixed mindset or
fixed
the growth
mindset
mindset?
Versus growth mindset.
Yeah.
If you have the fixed mindset and you say, it's failed, I failed, I am the failure, then I might just give up because I think I have no control, that I'm just bad.
Because it reflects badly on me.
Yeah. If you have a growth mindset, then self-criticism, actually, it's not as damaging because there's this belief that, well, I can do something about it, right? But, okay, so that is like an advantage when you believe that you can do something about it. I know that's part of actually, especially Taiwanese culture, because we did a little research on this. There's this belief that criticism helps you do something about it. But what we know, by the way, so even in Taiwan, we found that Taiwanese people who are self-compassionate, they had more of a learning orientation. It actually worked better for them. It was better for their health because doing something about it from feeling like, and I'm here for you. What do you need? It's, it's part of life. This is how we learn. How can I help? It actually creates less anxiety and allows you to do something about it more effectively than if you say, you could do something about it, but you're bad, I hate you, or you feel shame, you should feel ashamed of yourself. That actually makes it harder to do something about it. It's like you're making it harder for yourself to grow and to learn if you're shaming yourself. And if you're being
It's
harsh
almost like
with
the
yourself.
negative pressures that you're giving yourself is creating the barrier that's hindering you.
Because negative emotions
from
narrow our focus, more positive emotions broaden our focus. We can see it's hard to learn if you can't see the bigger picture. If you can't see anything but I'm such a failure, I'm so bad, everyone's going to hate me, you might be able, and it's not like you can't do anything. A lot of people achieve a lot through self-criticism, but it's not as effective as those people who say, failure is how we learn. It's okay to fail. What can I learn from that? Then that allows them to see the bigger picture and like, oh, I didn't think about that. Maybe I could try that, when it broadens your view and you have that sense of support, like, even if I fail, I'm going to try again because I know it's okay if I fail. I'll be there for myself. It's actually more effective. And there's lots of research that shows this. There's probably, I don't know, hundreds of studies at this point that show that it's a more effective way of motivating yourself than harsh self-criticism. And remember, constructive self-criticism is part of self-compassion. It's saying, that didn't work very well. That caused suffering. What might I do better? That's part of caring for yourself. But harsh self-criticism is you're bad, you're worthless, you're unlovable.
Yeah, that's the worst kind of self-talk. Let's talk a bit about the Taiwan study, which is featured in your book.
Yeah.
All right. Super interesting. You did a study in Taiwan, Thailand, and the United States.
Yes.
What happened in that study? What did you find?
Right. And so the reason I did the study is I happened to have a graduate student who was from Taiwan and a graduate student who was from Thailand. And I had some other graduate students from the United States. And this was it was one of the earliest studies I did on self-compassion. And we were talking about, well, how does culture impact our beliefs about self-compassion? And, a lot of people contrast the East versus the West, as if all Asian countries or all Eastern countries are like the same and all Western countries are the same. No, there are real differences in what type of, with the particular culture you live in. And so my student from Thailand, she said, well, actually, I was raised that self-compassion is a good idea, that we should also be compassionate to ourselves and others. And the student from Taiwan said, no, I was raised that harsh self-criticism is how we learn and improve ourselves. We are told from a very early age, you need to be hard on yourself to grow, to improve. And the American students were like, yeah, we're pretty hard on ourselves, but it was a little bit different. It's not so much you need to be hard on yourself to improve. It was like, you just need to be special and above average. And if you aren't, there's a problem. So there are real differences. And so we did a study in each culture. We collected data on self-compassion, well-being, like how happy you are, how depressed you are. We also did a measure of collectivism versus individualism, which kind of measures how enmeshed you are in your cultural beliefs. Okay. And what we found is that in Thailand, they did have the highest levels of self-compassion. They tended to be, because it was a cultural value, they tended to be more self-compassionate. In Taiwan, they had the lowest levels of self-compassion. They were the most harshly self-critical. In the United States, they were in between. Oh, but we also had a measure of self-esteem, which is like, how worthy, how good do you think you are? And Americans scored the highest. So they're different. So Americans were like, yeah, I'm worthy, I'm great, but I'm really hard on myself. I'm hard on myself when I don't feel so great when I fail. So there are real cultural differences. In Thailand, the more collectivistic you were meant the more self-compassionate you were. In Taiwan, the more individualistic you were, meant the more you were self-compassionate. In other words, those Taiwanese who are able to break away from that cultural message that self-criticism is the way to go and to kind of think for themselves are actually more self-compassionate. So it's kind of, it's very complex.
That's
but
really
in all
interesting.
three cultures, people did better. All three, regardless, even in Taiwan, those people who are more self-compassionate did better, like psychologically.
That is what I found that in Taiwan, when you choose to break away, which means that the cultural norm is to actually place heavy pressure and to think that, or the prevailing wisdom, quote unquote, is that high pressure creates high achievement.
Yes.
And this pressure, it tends to lead to more self-criticism.
Yes.
Right. And so I'm interested, especially in, say, like the US, right, where you might have high self-esteem.
Yeah.
Would it be possible that someone with high self-esteem, who tends to think highly of themselves, finds it harder to deal with failure? And then so when they come upon a failure, they would tend to, say, externalize, like, it's not my problem, it's your problem. It's because this thing went wrong, this thing went wrong.
That's one of the problems. So another thing, people think that self-compassion means not taking personal responsibility. It's actually the opposite. When you're very self-critical and you take things personally, and again, this may be more in a more individualistic culture. If you have high self-esteem and you know that admitting failure or that you made a mistake means you're going to hate yourself, then you're going to do, and remember that our subconscious creates a lot of our thoughts and emotions. Most of our thought is not processed in conscious awareness. Like the vast majority of this is processed unconsciously. We aren't even aware. This is our conditioning. It's our family, our culture, what we've seen on TV, our past traumas. So what's going to happen is it's going to go underground, and our subconscious is going to find ways to blame other people. It's going to find ways to frame the situation so that I don't have to face this unacceptable reality that I failed. It's your fault. It's your problem.
Yeah.
And that's very dangerous.
It's almost like this unbearable, flawed self that creates this version of the self that people are really afraid of. And then so in defense of that, you actually lash out at others.
Yes, exactly. That's right. There's research showing that it's easier to apologize because you can say, I made a mistake. It's only human to make mistakes. I'm so sorry, because it's okay to admit that I made a mistake. It hurts to admit that I hurt someone, but research shows people are more willing to try to repair past harms because, again, they can own it. They can acknowledge it because it's part of being human. This humanity thing is so huge. When we don't have this sense of separate self, like, it's all about me, and it's like, no, it's about being a human being who's flawed and imperfect, doing the best we can moment to moment, seeing the connection to the larger whole. When we don't take things so personally, and again, this is the irony I don't think people talk about in some collectivistic cultures. Even though, yes, the society is given more weight, the collective is given more weight, when the individual is shamed and really treated harshly when they fall out of line, it actually undermines all that good wisdom about the collective and the importance of seeing the larger whole. Because people, they take it so personally, and that also it's a different route.
That is kind of paradoxical.
It is.
So within that, I'd like to understand a little better about tender versus fierce. Self-compassion, which you talk about in your book. And I think it's super important because for a lot of parents with like, wow, if I'm going to, treat my kids with more compassion, how can I be fierce with them? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So tender and fierce self-compassion, you might say they're two faces of love. So they both feel like love. They're both aimed at the alleviation of suffering. So tender self-compassion is about acceptance. So we can accept ourselves unconditionally, and we can accept kind of the fact that our emotions, this hurts. We need to accept them unconditionally, because if we don't accept the fact that we're hurting and we pretend we aren't, or if we shove it underground, it's just going to make things worse. So it's more about ourselves and our emotions, and maybe the fact that the reality of the present moment.
Yeah.
But fierce self-compassion is about taking action to alleviate suffering. And it tends to be aimed, it's not totally black and white, but it tends to be aimed at behaviors and situations, that which, we might change. Some things it's hard to change, some things we can change. So our behaviors we can change, and our situations we can change. So again, just like a parent, this is an ideal parent, loves their child unconditionally, hopefully, but also wants to correct their child's behaviors, because if they don't, lovingly, coming from love, because if they don't, that child will be harmed. And also that parent wants to create good situations, like to protect their child, to provide for that child, to motivate their child to reach their full potential. It's very similar for ourselves. So fierce self-compassion is taking action to alleviate suffering. And we need both simultaneously, right? So if we take action with the idea that I will only be lovable if I achieve my goals, or if I correct this situation, then that creates a lot of anxiety and that creates a problem. But when we know I'm doing this because I love myself, for instance, like dealing with addiction, or behaviors, or even with our own inner critic, we can be like really firm and say no, draw boundaries, be very fierce, but there's still love in it. And we can feel it. We can feel if that no is coming from love, or if that no is coming from hate. No, because you're unworthy, I hate you, you're shame.
I'm trying to apply this to something that is happening right now with my kids, right? So so my son is getting, he's getting like these pre-braces, which are these things that he has to put in his mouth to try to fix his jaw, that's, and if he does it every night and correctly, then he may not need braces, right? So, but it's very uncomfortable. I mean, it's this huge like blue plastic thing and put it in his mouth, and it's hard to breathe and all that, right? And so, of course, he doesn't want to put them in.
Yeah.
Right. So if I were to say, take the tender and the fierce, compassionate approach, then I would say to him, I know this is uncomfortable.
Yes.
Right. This really is uncomfortable. Yes. Oh, this really hurts. Yeah. And you know what? When you do this, you're going to end up, you're going to have a better jaw. You're going to have a better bite, and everything is going to be better. So let's just make sure that you do this, and you got this.
Yeah.
And I trust
and
that
I would
you got
add in
this.
common humanity. So many kids your age have to do stuff like this. Kind of part of growing up. It's not only you, because he made me feeling like, why do I have to do it? No one else I know. Like he's really self-focused.
Right.
So the three elements are the same with compassion for others. Really emphasizing.
Yeah. And the opposite of that would be, I'm imagining like a super tiger dad or tiger mom just be like, you know what? This doesn't hurt. I mean, barely hurts compared to anything. Like, look, there's a lot of things that's going to hurt in your life. If you don't do this, you're going to end up with like crooked teeth. You're going to look funny. People are going to laugh at you. So just do this already.
Yeah. And so much of it is subtle. Like children know if we're coming from love, or we're coming from fear, or we're coming from kind of agitation, fear, and stress. They can feel it. We can also feel it when we talk to ourselves. And I know, I'm not a parenting expert, but I can imagine the way you talk to your son, and you might have to be fierce, like, no, really, I'm older than you, I'm wiser than you, you have to trust me, I know more than you on this particular subject. And hopefully your child believes that, and they want to believe you. And I'm doing this because I love you, and I honestly think it's in your best interest, as opposed to just do it because I say so.
Right.
And because your needs are less important than what I say or what I want. When children feel like their needs aren't being taken into account, it can really be harmful. But if he knows it's because you are taking his needs into account, and it's the exact same thing internally. If we know we're doing it, and sometimes we're fierce with ourselves, but it's because we love ourselves. It's because our needs are important. It's kind of reparenting yourself with being the ideal parent that maybe you weren't lucky enough to have. You probably weren't, and we're going to make mistakes internally and externally, and that's part of life. But
this is so crucial. And I realized one thing that I've been doing through this whole interview today, Kristin, is that I seem to be talking a lot about parenting, but the reason why is, and we're talking about self-compassion, right, which is really the way that we talk to ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think it's so key to understand that self-compassion is almost like parenting to yourself, but in the kind of more constructive way, right?
Yes.
And the reason why I keep bringing up parenting is because I see mommy guilt, right, the quote-unquote mommy guilt, as a lot of times the product of having been raised in a very high-pressure environment. And so moms who feel like they're not doing enough for their child, they're not putting them into enough classes, they're not giving them the resources, are therefore less good of a mom.
Yeah.
Right. And then so it seems to carry over, right? And I'm talking about moms and dads. I mean, you know, but mommy guilt is something that's kind of quote unquote. And because of that, the lack of self-compassion creates a lack of compassion when you're dealing with your children. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah, I mean, so basically what happens, and and I know that. So I have an autistic child, and I kept my career and I did my self-compassion work even though I had an autistic son. And you hear these stories of these mothers that gave up their career and devoted 40 hours a day and help, and you almost think, well, maybe my son's actually doing quite well, but maybe could have done better, whatever. But so I understand that it's very natural. But yeah, what's happening with that is two things, actually. A, this belief that there's a part of us that thinks we should be able to control situations. It's a very hard thing for us. And this is part of seeing ourselves as a larger whole. We aren't in total control. We can do it. We do what we can, but we aren't in control, right? And we don't need to take things personally. In other words, we don't need to totally. So Paul Gilbert, he's another self-compassion researcher, says, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And this important distinction. It may be our responsibility. No one else is going to step in and try to help my son. Or, so it doesn't mean we can avoid responsibility when we don't take it personally. We don't need to take it personally in the sense of blaming or shaming ourselves. It has nothing to do with our worth, right? So as a parent, yes, we want to take responsibility. We want to be the best parent we can. But we don't want to do it from the sense of what does that say about me? And it's hard in cultures where the more successful your child is, it's like the more self-esteem you get because people value you for being one of those parents. So you just really need to continually ask yourself, what, in terms of, so what we find if there's a conflict between the needs of a self and other with self-compassion, it's like everyone's needs are taken into account. So with my son, I made sure he got the help he needed, but I also made sure that I got what I needed. If you give up your own needs for your child's, right? And especially, so for instance, mommy guilt, what might that mean? What are you giving up in order to do everything for your child? You're probably harming yourself. You're also giving your child the message that personal needs don't count, and you're going to burn yourself out. And children are going to pick up on how stressed you are and how unhappy you are. And when you're with your child, instead of feeling like a calm, compassionate parent, they're going to be seeing a stressed parent who's really invested in you doing well, and they're going to take it personally.
Right. Or even saying look how much I did for you.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to take everyone's needs into account. Yes, you want to help your child as best you can, and you want to meet your own needs. And it's imperfect, and we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to get things wrong. And hopefully we learn from them, and we do a little better next time, or our children do a little better next time.
Yeah.
It's really just this idea of taking things personally. In other words, having our worth be dependent either on outcomes, how we perform, or on other people liking us, it just causes so many problems. Our worth comes from just the fact that we are conscious, flawed human beings who are living in this moment. Just think again, the moment a baby is born, that's when our worth is determined. And I know people are prejudiced and some people don't believe in every human baby being of intrinsic value. But if you do, and hopefully you do, our worth comes from just being a human being who's conscious, who's trying to make sense of this world. We weren't, the brains we're given are different. We didn't choose them. The circumstances are different. We didn't choose them. We have some ability to make a difference, and we try to do the best we can, but none of it has to do with our worth. Our worth is unconditional. Our worth comes simply from being.
Yeah.
Having said that, so I know this is not our fault. We don't have to judge or shame ourselves. Having said that, we want to be as happy as possible. We want other people to be as happy as well as possible. That's also compassion. So what can we do? And then it comes from love, not from like, if you don't do it, I'm not going to love you, or, appreciate me, or what are other people going to think of me? Then it comes from, okay, what's actually the best thing to do in this situation? If I do all this for my child, and I give up my own career or something, and I'm unhappy, then I'm going to be bringing that unhappiness into the relationship. That child may feel guilty. Like, for instance, I think with my son, the fact that I didn't give up my career meant that I did pretty well, my books do pretty well, and my son will be able to live off, my royalties for the rest of his life, so it's like, we don't always know, and he is doing well. Right. But life is, it's kind of like, who do you trust? Do you trust yourself to make all the right decisions? Or do you kind of trust the wisdom of life?
There is an analogy from your book that I love, that I've been using since I first read it, which is about, the plane, and if it's like losing air pressure, then the oxygen mask drop down, right?
Yeah.
And it always reminds you, said, if you are helping a child, put it on yourself first before you put it on the child.
Yes.
Right. For obvious reasons, because the air pressure drops and you might pass out if you don't have it on yourself, and in which case you can't help your child.
Yeah, so there's two reasons. A is just resources, you'll burn out. But the other thing is, talk about we aren't so separate. Our brains, our brains resonate with each other. They're designed by evolution to resonate with each other. So if you're a parent, even if you don't say to your child, I'm angry at you or whatever, what you bring into the interaction, the child feels through their mirror neurons. And so when you have self-compassion, when you forgive yourself and you care for yourself, when you ask yourself what you need, when you value yourself, that's in your mindset that your child resonates with. I used to regulate my son's emotions. If he was having a meltdown and he couldn't calm down, I used to help him by calming myself down. If I tried to calm him down, be calm, it's not going to work. So what I did was I just calmed myself down. I said, this is so hard for you, Kristin. Your child's having a meltdown. You can't help them. You feel it's so, it's hard. And I would just fill myself with, again, this field of compassionate presence. And my son would feel that. And that would help him calm down.
Children react more to our energies.
They do.
Especially younger children. And it's
pets as well, by the way. Dogs are not cats so much, but dogs are very sensitive to this. They can feel what you're bringing to the interaction.
Yes,
so
and other humans. Adults as well.
Yeah, and other people. And again, there's this myth of that when we think we're separate, I'm just going to control you, and it doesn't work that way. We aren't separate. People are totally influenced by our mindset, what's in our heart and mind. What we cultivate here influences other people. What they cultivate influences us. We're so much more interconnected than we think.
Yeah. Well, Kristin, this has been a fascinating talk, and I think the unique thing about our show is that we have most of our audience is in Taiwan, right? Okay. So they usually listen to my show in Chinese. Okay. But this being all in English, I'm also going to summarize it for them in Chinese, maybe in a later blog post or something. But we also have a lot of listeners in the U.S., in Europe, everywhere in the world, right? A lot of them are Taiwanese, and they're being parents as well. Yeah. So I find that this concept of self-compassion, why it is always a hit on my show, is I feel like there's a lot of people that grew up being heavily pressured in the system, and they are now at a point where they are a parent themselves, and they said, you know what, the chain is going to stop with me. I want to make a change. Yeah. Right. And they don't quite know how. And I think that's why people are constantly, they're trying to be self-compassionate, but they're trying to undo the years and decades of programming. And so they're running up against that wall, right? And that's why I think I can't believe that your book is only just coming out now here, in Taiwan. It's long overdue. But I really hope that it will help people. Again, it's about self-compassion. It's not a parenting book, but the concept of how can you be truly self-compassionate without being self-indulgent?
Yes.
That is a very crucial thing that I think needs clarification, needs training. Yeah. Right? You need to know like what is the correct way. And then you need to believe, according to all the research that Dr. Neff has done and the thousands that have followed, that it really does work.
Yeah. But we've all had moments when we had someone, maybe you had a teacher growing up who was, maybe they were tough, they had high expectations of you, but they believed in you, they loved you, they helped you, you felt their care, their support, and it's more effective. It's more effective because you're working with the ability to learn. You're helping your ability to learn when it comes from love than when it comes from fear.
Totally. I was just talking to my daughter yesterday, actually. I asked her to if she could pinpoint a couple of the turning points in her life, right? We were talking about self-narrative. And she thought for a long time, and she said, well, coming to the U.S. is definitely one of those turning points. And then she gave an answer that I was very surprised about. She said, my teacher in the 3rd and 4th grade in Taiwan. Oh. And she said, that teacher, those 2 years was a turning point in my life. And I was very moved because I know that those 2 years she had a teacher that was supportive, that was exactly like that. Yes. That was compassionate and self-compassionate. Yes. Yeah. And we really do hope that Taiwan, which actually turns out it ranks, the last among the three, among US, Thailand, and Taiwan, actually is the lowest in self-compassion, right? We hope that it could raise the scores the next time that we revisit it.
Yeah. And again, remember, we don't want to beat ourselves up for beating ourselves up, because the reason we do it is because we want to help ourselves. The reason parents do it is because at some level they want to help their child.
Yes.
It's not
it's coming from love.
It's coming from love, but it's just it's not as effective. Before we go, I just want to talk about the nervous system, because it is really key here.
Oh, yes.
We have what's called the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight, flight, or freeze response, which is a safety mechanism. Self-criticism or criticism of others comes from fear. So what happens when we feel threatened is, we go into fight, flight, or freeze. So we might fight other people, or run away from them. Or with ourselves, we fight ourselves, or we flee into a sense of shame and isolation, or we freeze. So sympathetic nervous system arousal, we need a little bit of it. We need enough to pay attention to threats, but too much, it actually makes it harder to learn. We also have the parasympathetic, which is more toward family members and close others. It's sometimes called the tend and befriend response. And that creates things like heart rate variability, lowers cortisol, actually allows us to be more flexible. And it can be, especially for the long-term effects, it enables learning more than that short-term, I got to survive or not. Self-compassion works with the parasympathetic nervous system. Self-criticism works with the sympathetic nervous system. So what you're doing is you're actually shifting your safety systems. Both work, but self-criticism works more short-term, like right now, get you out of run away from a lion. But it doesn't work for things like getting good grades in school or having a happy marriage or learning long-term. Parasympathetic, the care system, is actually more effective. So using things like some supportive touch can actually be very helpful. They're working with the parasympathetic nervous system to help you feel safe, just like hugging your child. Right. You can touch your own body. Yeah. So I guess just to make the point that it's actually natural for your first instinct to be like, that's built into us. And so in some ways, parents they're scared for their children. They want to, and they're scared for a lot of reasons. So it's both are natural. But we have to do a little work to use the care system to work for personal failures because it's not the first thing that pops up. Does that make sense? It's just important to know that this also is part of our biology. It's not just our culture.
It totally makes sense while at the same time being counterintuitive, which is the interesting
which is
part
life,
I
which
think
is
about.
psychology, right? Yeah.
Yes. And that's what makes it so interesting. And that's why everyone really should read your book. If you haven't read it in English or now in Chinese, please run out and get it. The Chinese title is 自我慈悲，终结内耗，重建心理韧性与内在稳定的温柔力量. It's a big long thing because there's the subcaption, right? Which is to actually to increase your resilience and to gain more internal stability, which is all things that will happen if you do practice self-compassion.
Absolutely. It gives you resilience, strength, stability, can deal with different situations. Absolutely.
Well, this has been a great conversation, Dr. Neff, and thank you so much for your time. And we really hope that the next time that you do get a chance to revisit the study in Taiwan, that you will find that the needle has moved.
Let's hope. For everyone. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.